Do you realize what this means, girls?
Yes! No more laundry!
Oh, it means power, riches, revenge.
This episode was filmed prior to the release of the 2021 Cinderella film adaptation starring Camila Cabello. I really hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. It deals with themes of abuse, trauma, and family death. Feel free to listen to our other episodes and take care.
Previously on Fringe.
Tune in 2 weeks when we talk about
The whole Cinderella cinematic universe, the CCU, if you will.
the CCU.
I just want to take a moment to appreciate the detail of the illustration here. This is Cinderella's father killing her mother. That's the opening of our version of Cinderella. So with that in mind...
Dark.
Drop that crown!
What's inside you is stronger than any spell.
That wasn't an order, you know.
I know.
Remember me?
Be kind.
And have courage.
Welcome to Sweetheart Saturdays, a rom commentary podcast hosted by Mika and Becca, two heartwarmed romantics who gush about our favorite romance flicks and examine what makes rom-coms work. What is the appeal of the Cinderella story and why can we still appreciate it today? We discuss the misconceptions about backing Cinderella, I can read, and why her experience with abuse resonates with so many today. So obviously we'll be talking briefly about abuse, so if that's not to your comfort, then feel free to listen to our other episodes. So in every iteration, Cinderella's abuse is pivotal to her story, as is her growing self-worth and longing for love. And instead of dismissing her story as the girl who finds a prince trope, we must recognize that her story is about perseverance and self-love, with a little romance on the side. To prepare for this episode, I brought artifacts, a little show and tell moment here. I was going to commit to wearing just one of my shoes here, and then I was like, I don't really want to show my feet. This is not that kind of podcast, so here you go. It's a gold slipper, so it's not to the accurate costume levels that I wanted it to be, but it's fine. I'm also wearing not blue but pink. I wanted to excuse it away as oh, I'm paying homage to, you know how in the Disney movie she wears pink first and then the stepsisters are totally cool about it. That's what this is about. And then I also brought out a Filipino book of stories that I grew up with, and I have here the story opened up to Maria Alimango, which translates to Maria Crab.
Crab.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to take a moment to appreciate the detail of the illustration here. This is Cinderella's father killing her mother. That's the opening of our version of Cinderella. So with that in mind, the Cinderella story has existed for a long time, but obviously it was popularized by Disney in the last century. I just want to bring up a quote here from an article titled, "Her story, Cinderella's story, isn't superficial, it's an inspiration to victims of abuse." The thing is, people read Cinderella as a love story, but the real treasure within Cinderella's story was that she was an abuse victim who found a home against all odds. To me, that really resonates and reminds me of A Cinderella Story. I think of how Sam found her new home with Rhonda, an unexpected found family vibe. And I think it boils down to what Cinderella, the 2015 version, was all about, which is having courage and being kind. So Cinderella's story has always resonated with me because she was very relatable. Her strengths were quieter than, say, people like Mulan, who I also loved, but I didn't really connect to on a personality level. Everybody always called me Mulan because they were racist, but the real princess that I resonated the most with was probably Cinderella and Belle. But in recent years, I've come to be more Cinderella, I'd say, because Belle was very surface level, like, oh, I like books. That's
Right.
it. So I remember how we had to do like debates in English class, and someone did like a whole speech about how Disney princesses were
anti-feminist.
and I really wanted to scream then. I think we're not really serving the story or really being critical when we just go like, Disney princess equals girly plus romantic, happy ending equals bad, and then like a little angry emoji. So I think that it's a good idea to really examine what do we mean by, well, I want a strong female character, and how that whole trope also operates within the male gaze. There is strength in being kind to those around you, and that's pretty much Cinderella's thing. I just think that we shouldn't be so dismissive as Cinderella, especially because in the context of her story, people often make the argument that, well, why didn't she just walk away? Why did she need a man? If you look at, like, historically, women did need, unfortunately, like on a practical level, men because of money and status,
surviving,
and just security. So
if you were to put it in historical context, and that's going to be in several cultures, men held status and women didn't, and women really didn't have a whole lot of a choice. In Cinderella's context, that's not even her main goal. She could have left, but I think in various iterations she had several reasons for staying, like in Ever After, for the other servants that worked there. Plus, it's just not easy to leave an abusive situation. She's a character that finds a lot of the good in the situation around her. So like in the Disney movies, she connects with all of the animals that are around her. You see that in the 2015 version as well. It's been a while since I've watched the Rodgers and Hammerstein one, but that one, I know she's at least got friends and stuff, people that she can talk to. There's definitely a few reasons why she would stay, but I think one of the most prominent ones is the attachment to the home and to her family. I think you see that in most iterations, which is important. I always kind of resonated with Cinderella too. I know growing up it was very much Aurora for a while, and I loved Belle, but I loved Cinderella too, and I went through a period with Cinderella and with Ariel where I was like, all they care about is boys, and that's boring. Yeah. And I think that was very much society telling me that all they cared about was boys. And then when you like watch it again and you're really looking at it as a story, you're like, now wait a minute. Maybe that's not all there is to it. Because like even in the Disney Cinderella, when she's singing "A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes," it's not like I'm wishing to marry a prince. It's very much about freedom. Cinderella's story largely is about freedom to choose or to leave. And love is one of the many opportunities she has as a result of getting that freedom. If we're talking about the misconception of Disney princesses and these fairy tale heroines, I think that Disney led into marketing with this, with Brave and even Frozen and Moana. They took it and marketed with it because of course they did. The idea that Disney princesses give up everything to be with a man, especially Cinderella and Ariel. On that same page, Ariel, she also did not sing or call out specifically to be with Eric. He was just a fraction of what she wanted as a whole, which was to be a part of a different world and to explore that world.
Yeah.
I know that Cinderella for me was kind of an inspiration because she's one of those characters that really perseveres and she pushes through what she's going through, both with her stepfamily. Even a Cinderella story, she really pushes through bullying, and in that one it's not even just her family, it's just a modern high school. Everybody treats her like crap. I think that a lot of those movies that take these old stories like Shakespearean stories or Jane Austen or these fairy tales and they make them very modern, they become really fresh even though you wouldn't think that they would be. The overall storyline is still really captivating. I think that the Cinderella story did a great job of that. I appreciate the versions where she's allowed to freely express her grief. I mean, in Cinderella, the Disney animated film,
she's by the well, right?
Yeah, we see it when her dress, as shown through your outfit, when her dress is ripped by her sisters, and she's really like put on display, like embarrassed. Right? Ugh. She cries at the well. That's like a very telling moment. I know that Brandy's version has something like that. I can't think of the 2015 Cinderella.
When she loses her father, she has a moment by the door. They really linger on her crying. Like she sinks down, cries onto her knees, which I thought was a very powerful moment. I feel like the ever after version, it's
I think that's the best
more
one.
for me. When you can see it's all bottling up, and
Yeah,
she's such like a
yeah.
patient person that when she finally explodes, it's like, damn.
She's great because it's a more serious film, I feel like, and not the fairy tale film. She really displays that want, that yearning of still having them as a family because they're the only family she's ever had.
Yes, oh my gosh.
One of my favorite moments of expressing that grief is when Marguerite destroys her shit or her mom's stuff.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah, and like tries to take her
The
stuff,
book.
and Danielle like loses her mind. Like it's a snapping point for her, and she gets really angry, and I love that part. I thought that was really great. And then towards the end as well, when you have her talking with her stepmother, and she's like expressing that she, you know, did you ever love me at all? And she's like,
oh my god,
why would I? Like that was a really good display too.
To Disney's credit, I would say that when they went back in 2007 and revisited the story with Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time, an excellent film, even just by itself. I think that they explore that grief too, where the stepmother. So in that movie, if you guys haven't watched it, I don't know why you wouldn't have watched it. There's this one scene towards the beginning of the film where the stepmother destroys the other glass slipper, and Cinderella has like a solo moment of this was all just a dream. And I think the way that they turn on that idea of a dream is a wish your heart makes, she reverses that in this movie. I think that they did a great job in the animated version of that particular like grief. Plus they gave her a little bit more agency. They had the little action sequence towards the end of the movie where she's like breaking out of that pumpkin. I love that moment.
There was an overwhelming amount of criticism about these Disney princesses. Like, I feel like if they didn't change it, people probably would have stopped watching. Like, it would have fell out. Like, it was very intense. And I feel like efforts with that sequel were like, well, let's give her a little more. That's in 1950.
It wasn't like, as Cinderella, the second movies, I'm pretty sure that it was meant to be like a pilot project for a Cinderella show, and then they ended up not going forward, but they just sort of like stuck those 3 episodes together. I'm pretty sure
that would have been cool though. Side note.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I would always rewatch that sequel because it was all I had in terms of like the animated version. I was in that phase as a 9-year-old of like,
oh well, all she does is she gets with this guy and I fall asleep every time or whatever.
And so I'd always watch the Cinderella 2, and in it she's got a lot more gumption, I want to say. She defies the lady who's trying to teach her to be like a princess. Then she teaches Anastasia that she can make your move on the baker. And it's just empowering. I appreciate them for making that happen. I just wish that more people paid attention because I know that those were like direct to DVD sequels. And so that's the issue, is that people often only think of the 1950s version. But to that end, like we've discussed, this is a story that's been transformed and adapted over and over and over again. So there's a reason for that. And I think it's because it's about her kindness or her goodness and her courage to be kind, to stay selfless amidst chaos and like people literally like abusing you. And I think that that's why it stood the test of time. Like my brother and I, we would rewatch the Cinderella 3 movie all the time. It's just good cinema. And it's a good story, and give it a chance. You can do so
much with it too.
Yeah.
And I think that Disney did a good job. I mean, they've really tried to make her story more contextualized with our time, because they've done the 2015 Cinderella, which was, I mean, I saw it twice in theaters. It was really good. I think it captured a lot of, specifically the animated Disney's Cinderella, a lot of her characterization, but allowed a little bit more room and did what those live action movies are doing, which is kind of filling in some of the blanks. Like for that one, they explored why she's able to talk to animals and her purity of character, which I appreciate because it's not an ideal everyone has to subscribe to so much as it is just who she is. And the
Yeah,
lesson there,
yeah.
which they're giving to kids, is to have courage and be kind, not to be a perfect little girl that will fall in love with the prince.
Yes, yeah.
They really tried to elevate that message of self-worth and self-confidence, which is great.
Yeah, and she kind of had a moment similar to the ever after conversation between her and her stepmother, where she asks the stepmother, why are you like this? How can you be so cruel? That's a moment in that film that stood out to me as well. You can feel the tension. I think
she did
that
such a good job too.
it's so telling of her character, her asking why. Many of us who have gone through any kind of experience with abuse or any experience where somebody's being really cruel, that's a question that comes up with dealing with that trauma, and you don't get the answer that you want often.
There's not a good answer for
that
it.
It's a very human experience. The fact that in Ever After and in Cinderella 2015, but also I would argue in A Cinderella Story, I'm pretty sure Sam has a similar confrontation with Jennifer Coolidge's character.
It's been a little bit. Is it when she's about to get her letter or something? And I don't know.
Yes. There's a moment where she believes that, you know, her stepmom's finally going to like validate her and like encourage her.
And she,
then she makes some sort of insult. And it just cuts deep. And that happens in Ever After as well.
Yeah.
And it also happens in Cinderella. I just pulled up the article again. And they make a really good point here. Cinderella never asked for a prince. She just wanted a break from her abuse. It's a desire that isn't a sin. In fact, the only thing that Cinderella was guilty of was choosing a man who couldn't bother to remember her face or to even ask for her name. But if choosing a man who isn't worth it is a crime, I'd be serving a life sentence by now.
That's funny. And
hilarious, but true.
Yeah, I think that there's some context to be had in that older stories were restricted and idealized in that way.
I recently rewatched Pride and Prejudice, a 2005 film, and the mother in that film, Mrs. Bennet, as a kid growing up, I would always be like not as empathetic towards her flights of nerves. Truly, I'm pretty sure she had anxiety about the fact that she had 5 daughters and none of them had like any prospects of like a secure financial future. Looking back on it now, there's this moment in the film where Lizzie turns back to her mom on the stairs and she's like, is there truly nothing else you can think of? And it's sort of a funny moment where her mom's like, well, you try having 5 daughters, then it'll be all that you can think about. It's not even just within a Cinderella context. That's just how it was back in the day. You just had to get married and be secure in that way. And that's a sad reality. That's in part why they gave her that happy ending, so that she could have
that
a life
security,
beyond of abuse and life that wasn't just servitude. That's why it's important that they were in love too, because then it wasn't just like the security. I mean, this is Sweetheart Saturday, so there's gotta be that love element too, but it's not central to the story.
Cinderella's a fairy tale. It's set in some vague historical time period that doesn't exist, but it is affected by those real world expectations. And that's why a movie like A Cinderella Story, which isn't set in that time frame, it does more than that. She gets her college that she wants to go to. She also gets a boyfriend that she wants. She gets her dad's restaurant. She gets that security and that freedom in different ways because that's the context. So I think you've got to really look at it from what the expectations were, what works within that story.
Exactly.
That context, that worldly context when these stories were made or when they're set directly impacts how the stepmother acts, because
so true.
Her motive almost throughout every single one is in part greed and in part security.
Yes.
It is both Ever After and Cinderella 2015 at least, but there may be more, where she marries into this family with an understanding that she will have security for herself and her daughters and probably some wealth, and then her husband dies. So she is left without it. I do think it's more status as well on top of that, but I think that context directly impacts it.
Yeah, you know what we didn't include, and I now feel bad for not including it? Ella Enchanted. I'm like,
so true.
Oh, shoot. That all falls in with that as well, though.
That's a great one.
Especially because of her story with obedience. Like, it's all about the fact that she wants that agency. And it's not even that once she escapes from her stepfamily that all of a sudden she's out of character. She's always had that. It's just that her family has impeded on that and just sort of like trampled all over her, which I think is a very important difference that they establish. Just because you go through all of this trauma doesn't mean that all of the things that you become after or whatever are totally different. Like, it's not that magical. It's always been there. Also, the fairy godmother in that movie really, really irritated me.
Also, the book was better.
Just saying.
The fairy godmother in that one
is very frustrating.
I don't think
to
they
watch.
did enough with her.
I agree.
I'm looking at a list of films based on Cinderella just so I can see if there's anything that is really popular that we maybe didn't see.
Last year when the pandemic hit, I definitely started rewatching the Brandy version, and then it was too late at night, and so my parents, because I was watching with my parents, they were like, let's just watch it tomorrow, and then it never happened. So I need to rewatch that. Especially because
really
it was
version.
Like the first Filipino rep that I ever saw, ever. We both watched Once Upon a Time, and they've done Cinderella twice in that show. So in the first few seasons, even in that show, they didn't really value her as a character that could be like a
she
main
was really like at
cast.
First she was tossed aside kind of.
Yeah, and then when they did the final season where Henry is all grown up and he has a daughter, his wife is literally Cinderella. But I also would argue they didn't do enough with her either. Like, she felt like a very flat character. I feel like they should have done a lot more with her, is my point there.
I wanted to round out and say that even if Cinderella's sole goal in life was to find a prince and fall in love, that's literally not a bad thing. I think we're at a point right now, the 90s and 2000s was a huge point where people were like really fighting for representation that wasn't that. As a society within that industry, we've pulled back from that so that we can have standalone female characters that really have their own story, which is great and needed and deserved. I think that we're at a point where we can also have women who just want to fall in love, and that's okay, because it's a little bit more saturated now that little girls and teenagers have representation that covers bases. And it also depends on what you do with it. So when you're looking at Cinderella 2015, she wants to be with a prince, but she has so much more going with her, and I think that's all really great.
Yeah, but this reminds me of, and this is why you should stream our other episode about To All the Boys and Ever After, is that we do deserve those stories because they're very real, and just because you're romantic, it doesn't mean that you're brainless, that you don't realize that there are layers to...
Or shallow or something.
Yeah, or shallow is the right word. You either are a rational person or you're a hopeless romantic who doesn't understand the ways of the world. That's so black and white and not really reflective of what it is actually like to be out in the world trying to find love. And I love that now we have stories like Lara Jean's that are similar to the more Cinderella type personalities, where you can have that desire and it's not the only thing that defines who you are.
Her story always hits a lot of, especially young girls as they're growing up in our society, like to look at heroines that are inspiring and that are kind and brave. And I think that she is one of those people that really encompasses that in any version of herself.
Yeah. There is strength to being kind to the world around you. There is strength in being kind to anyone you come across. Another thing that she learns along her journey, in any iteration, is how to set those boundaries. Maybe Cinderella is about taking your trauma and learning how to process it and not letting it destroy your hope or to find renewed hope. And she doesn't reject these things of being kind, being courageous, being connected with nature. She doesn't reject these things about herself. She just walked away and found safety in a new family where she could freely do those things and not be taken advantage of. Because I think that, like you said, girls really look up to these kinds of characters. It's obviously easier said and easier written and easier shown than done. But I think that would help when real people like ourselves go through trauma and all of a sudden do that trauma response of being like, I'm just gonna reject everything about me that led to whatever it was that happened. And having characters like Cinderella who go through this deep pile of shit and still come out like, no, you know what, I can still love and I can still hope and dream.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. In conclusion, give Cinderella a chance, have courage, be kind, and comment below which adaptation grinds your gears more.
Grinds your gears? Not which one's
Or
your
gets-
favorite. Which one?
Yeah. You want to know what their favorite is. I want to know which one they absolutely abhor. Thanks. Have a great Saturday. Go fall in love or don't. Bye.
I call upon all the forces of the universe. Bippity boppity boo! Reverse the moon and sun. Turn back tide and time. Unravel Cinderella's happily ever after.